The smell of old fabric lingers in the air, their words still echoing. "Mom, you smell like old fabric. Please leave." Still, I stand frozen, my son's cold dismissal ringing louder than any doorbell ever could. As their dinner party carries on in the other room, I don't flinch. I simply slip my coat off, my fingers brushing the family photos on the wall, now strangers to me. While they laugh and toast, I sign away everything, my home, my life. That's when I realize they never needed me. But now they'll see what happens when you push your mother away. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Evelyn sat by her window, the light from the lamp casting long shadows on the pages of her book. The quiet of the house was soothing, and for a moment, it felt as if the world outside was a distant memory. But then, a knock at the door interrupted the stillness. It was Sabrina, her voice soft but firm. "Could you step out for a bit tonight? We're hosting." Evelyn looked up from her book, her brow furrowing in surprise. Before she could respond, Tyler's voice followed, cold and dismissive. "You just smell like old fabric lately. Not a big deal, just it lingers." The words didn't sting at first. Evelyn had been called worse in her life, but hearing them now, spoken so casually by her own son, cut deeper than she expected. She set the book aside, meeting their eyes with a steady gaze. "You mean I embarrass you?" It wasn't a question, just a statement. But Tyler and Sabrina said nothing in return. Instead, they exchanged a brief look, as though deciding whether to offer a half-hearted excuse. Evelyn's chest tightened, but she didn't let it show. Without another word, she rose and grabbed her cardigan from the chair. The house felt suddenly too small, too suffocating, and she stepped into the cold evening air without hesitation. She didn't grab a coat, didn't think to. The chill of the night wrapped around her, but it wasn't the cold that unsettled her. It was the quiet realization that she was no longer needed. Not here, not anymore. Her boots clicked on the pavement as she walked aimlessly, just to escape the weight of their indifference. She ended up at the coffee shop a few blocks away, a place she used to frequent when the world felt too heavy. The warmth inside was a welcome relief, but the comfort was fleeting. She sat by the window, nursing a cup of tea, watching the world go by. The people inside, young and full of energy, didn't seem to notice her, and for once, she didn't mind. Her phone buzzed in her bag. It was Aiden. "Where are you?" She stared at the screen for a moment, but didn't respond. There was no need. Aiden knew. He always knew. But the distance between them was something she couldn't explain. He had his own life, and she wasn't about to burden him with her own feelings of displacement. When she returned home, the house was quiet again. She stepped inside, her footsteps muffled against the hardwood floor. The smell of dinner lingered in the air, but the sound of laughter was gone. The plates had been cleared, the remnants of their gathering erased. No one had asked where she had gone. No one had checked on her. Evelyn moved past the kitchen, where Tyler and Sabrina stood, exchanging small talk as if nothing had happened. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension, but she didn't acknowledge it. She didn't need to. Her room was untouched, the bed neatly made, the chair by the window just as she had left it. She stood there for a moment, staring at the familiar surroundings, but something inside her shifted. The anger bubbled up slowly, a quiet fury that had been building for years. She was done being invisible, done tolerating their cruelty. She walked to the kitchen and found a pen and paper, scribbling a note. "Leave the keys on the counter by next month," it read, simple but final. She slipped it into her desk drawer, the cold metal reassuring in her hand. Tomorrow, she would take the first step. But tonight, she let the silence settle around her, knowing it would be the last time she would ever feel this small. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, the soft morning light filtering through the window, casting a gentle glow on the deed she held in her hands. It was the house she'd built with her military pension, her survivor benefits, hers, completely. She ran her fingers over the paper, the weight of it, the history it represented, the life she'd made for herself. She had never wanted much, just peace, security, and dignity. The house had been all those things. She thought back to when she'd bought it, years ago, when she'd come back from service and wanted a place to call her own. She had been single, independent, and determined. No mortgage, no debt. It was hers, truly. But the memory of Tyler and Sabrina's dismissive words came flooding back, souring the quiet of the morning. "You just smell like old fabric lately." A part of her wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but there was no humor in it. No room for humor. They hadn't just rejected her presence. They'd made it clear she was a burden, unwanted and out of place in the life she had built for them. Her fingers tightened on the deed. What had she been thinking, letting them move in all those years ago when Tyler lost his job? She had told herself it was temporary. No rent, no conditions, just family helping family. She'd wanted to offer a safe space. But now she realized, too late, that she had given them an inch and they had taken miles. They had assumed it was theirs, as though the house, her sacrifice, her life, was a simple extension of their expectations. Her phone buzzed, breaking the heavy silence. It was Marcia Fielding, her former legal contact from the VA. Evelyn had kept in touch over the years, mostly for legal advice and updates about her pension, but today, her call held more weight. "Hello, Marcia," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "How are you, Evelyn?" Marcia's tone was warm but professional, a familiar comfort. "I'm fine," Evelyn replied, though it wasn't entirely true. "Listen, I need to transfer the house, but not to them." There was a pause on the other end, a quiet understanding in Marcia's silence. "Do you want to punish or protect?" she asked. And Evelyn could hear the depth of the question in her voice. Evelyn sighed, her hand gripping the deed. "Both," she said. "I've spent my whole life protecting them. I'm done." They need to see what happens when you take someone's generosity for granted. Another pause, this one longer. "All right," Marcia finally said. "Let's meet." They arranged to meet the following afternoon at Marcia's office, and as the day wore on, Evelyn's thoughts became a blur of decisions and their consequences. She walked through the house, moving from room to room, memories of raising Tyler and Aiden, of welcoming Sabrina into the fold. The laughter, the shared meals, all of it seemed so distant now, as if it had never really been hers to begin with. The next day, Evelyn walked into Marcia's office, a small, functional space tucked away in a corner of the city. Marcia greeted her with a professional nod and motioned for her to sit. The paperwork was already on the desk. Transfer forms, notarization sheets. Marcia, always precise, didn't waste time. "You're sure about this?" Marcia asked, eyeing Evelyn over the top of her glasses. "Once the deed is gone, it's theirs, for good." Evelyn nodded, her heart heavy but resolute. "I've made my peace. It's time for them to face the consequences of their actions." Marcia smiled faintly, an understanding look crossing her face. "You've thought it through." "I have." Marcia picked up the pen. "Then let's do this." Evelyn watched as Marcia filled in the forms, her handwriting neat and efficient. As the lawyer slid the final document toward her to sign, Evelyn felt a strange weight lift from her shoulders. It was done. But the weight of her decision lingered. She knew what was coming. She knew Tyler and Sabrina would be angry, confused. They wouldn't understand. Marcia looked up from the papers, her expression thoughtful. "You've taken control back, but it's going to be messy, Evelyn." Evelyn nodded, her gaze steady. "Let it be messy. It's time they learn that I won't be their punching bag anymore." As she signed the final paper, Evelyn couldn't help but wonder, would they ever realize the cost of this? The house, her home, was gone. But for the first time in years, Evelyn felt like she had reclaimed something far more important than property. She had reclaimed herself. Evelyn's car hummed steadily as she drove toward Valor House, the road stretching out before her like the choice she had already made. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel, feeling the weight of what was to come. The house she'd lived in for so many years, the house she had built with her military pension and survivor benefits, was no longer just a home. It was a burden, one she was ready to release. When she arrived, Reggie Dawson was waiting at the entrance, his broad shoulders blocking out the morning sun. He was dressed casually, but there was a sense of purpose in his posture. He gave her a nod and motioned for her to follow him. "Evelyn," he said warmly, extending his hand. "Glad you could make it. Come on in." The building was quieter than she expected, clean, functional, but not overdone. The air inside smelled of fresh paint and clean linens. Reggie showed her the various spaces, explaining how the house operated, the rooms where veterans stayed, and the small communal areas where they gathered. The atmosphere was simple but comforting, a refuge for those who had fallen through the cracks of society. "People like you built this country," Reggie said as they walked through the hallways. "Now we house those who fell through the cracks." His voice was steady, but Evelyn could hear the sincerity in his words. Evelyn nodded, taking in the pictures on the walls, veterans, families, and old military memorabilia. She had lived her life for others, offering her service in the Navy and then to her family. But here, at Valor House, it was different. Here, the service was reciprocal. People were given a second chance. They stopped in a small office at the end of the hall, and Reggie motioned for her to sit across from him. He slid a legal document toward her. "I know this isn't easy, Evelyn," he said, his expression both gentle and firm. "But I want to make one thing clear. We accept gifts. We don't take guilt. You're not doing this because you feel sorry for us. You're doing it because it's what you want." Evelyn paused, her fingers resting on the paper in front of her. The decision had been made the moment she walked away from her son's house. This wasn't about guilt or obligation. This was about reclaiming control over her life, something she hadn't done in years. "I'm not guilty," she said, her voice steady. "I'm done being used." The words felt like a declaration. She wasn't apologizing for her decision. She had nothing to apologize for. Reggie's gaze softened, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "We're not asking for your guilt, just your willingness to be part of something real." He paused, watching her face. "You've thought this through?" Evelyn nodded. "I have." There was a calm that settled in her chest as she realized the truth of it. She wasn't just signing away a house. She was giving away a part of her past, part of her life that had been shaped by expectations, by duty, by others. And now, for the first time, she was choosing something for herself. Reggie slid the papers across the desk, his fingers brushing hers as he did. "Whenever you're ready." Evelyn took a breath and picked up the pen. There was no hesitation this time. As she signed the papers, she felt a strange lightness settle in her bones. The weight of years of sacrifice lifting just a little bit. "I'll have my legal team handle everything," Reggie said, looking over the documents once more. "We'll get this done." Evelyn stood up, feeling the first stirrings of freedom. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It was about doing something that mattered, something real. Valor House was more than just a charity. It was a place where the forgotten were given a second chance, and for the first time, Evelyn felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. As she walked out of the building, the air felt fresher, cleaner. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but in this moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. But as she pulled away, a thought lingered in her mind. Would they ever understand? Would Tyler and Sabrina see the weight of her decision? Or would they simply move on, unaware of what had been sacrificed? She drove on, her mind finally at peace, knowing that, for once, she had done something that truly mattered. The house felt empty when Evelyn returned, despite the faint traces of laughter and clinking dishes still echoing in the corners of her mind. The door closed softly behind her, and the quiet that filled the house seemed louder than ever before. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, the kind that weighed on the walls and refused to leave. She moved slowly, her steps quieter than usual. Each room she passed reminded her of the years she had spent here, the memories carefully tucked away, though she no longer recognized the woman who had once lived in them. When she reached the staircase, she stopped. The door to her room was open. Evelyn hesitated for a moment before walking in, the familiar scent of lavender and old books greeting her. But something was wrong. The floral wallpaper she had picked out years ago was gone, replaced with a bland, neutral tone. The bed, once covered in the soft quilt she had made, was now covered with new bedding, stiff and unfamiliar. The curtains, once a warm shade of peach, were now pale gray, thin, and corporate-looking. Sabrina stood in the doorway, hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Surprise," she said, the words too bright, too forced. "We wanted to refresh the room." Evelyn blinked, taking in the changes. The room, the one that had been hers, was now a stranger's space. She felt something tighten in her chest, a silent grief for the home she had given everything to, now so easily erased by their hands. "My room?" Evelyn asked, her voice softer than she meant it to be. Tyler, standing by the window, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, it's technically the guest room now." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. She stood there for a moment, her gaze drifting from the new bedding to the untouched dresser, where a small porcelain figurine she'd had for years still sat, forgotten. It was a small thing, but to her, it had always been a part of the room, a part of her. Now, it felt like a relic. Evelyn didn't say anything. She turned and began to pack a suitcase silently, folding clothes she hadn't worn in months. Her movements were deliberate, each fold a quiet rejection of the space she had once occupied. She didn't look up as Aiden stood in the doorway, his gaze lingering on her but saying nothing. She could feel his presence, though. He wasn't part of the plan, but he always seemed to be. His silence was louder than any words. When the suitcase was packed, Evelyn zipped it up, the sound of the zipper sharp in the otherwise still room. She stood for a moment, taking one last look at the space that had once been hers. It was gone now, replaced with something new. Aiden stepped into the room, his footsteps hesitant. "Are you sure about this?" he asked softly, his voice carrying the weight of a question he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She only gave him a long look, one that spoke volumes more than words could convey. There was sadness in it, but no regret. This was the end, and nothing would change that. "I'll be fine," she said quietly, her voice steady. "I'm done being invisible." She moved past him, walking down the hallway without looking back. Aiden didn't follow her. He knew better than to ask her to stay, to try to stop her. The next morning, Evelyn visited Marcia's office. The deed transfer paperwork was waiting on the desk, as if it had always been waiting for this moment. Marcia was already seated, her expression professional, but there was a softness in her eyes, an understanding that didn't need to be spoken. "Let's finalize it," Evelyn said, the words coming out easier than she expected. Marcia nodded and slid the papers across the desk. "Once you sign this, it's done. The house will be officially transferred to Valor House. We'll handle the rest." Evelyn reached for the pen, the weight of the decision still present but no longer overwhelming. As she signed her name, a strange clarity settled over her. This was the right thing to do. This was the only thing she could do. She put the pen down, and the silence between them was comfortable, reassuring even. Marcia picked up the paperwork and began reviewing it one last time. Evelyn sat back, her mind momentarily drifting to Tyler and Sabrina. Would they feel the loss? Would they understand? She shook the thought away, focusing on the papers in front of her. The closing date was set. The deed was no longer hers. It was done. Evelyn stood at the top of the stairs, her hand resting lightly on the banister. From here, she could see everything. The living room below, Sabrina arranging throw pillows with a precision that bordered on obsessive, and the strands of twinkling lights that dangled from the ceiling, now taking over the space that had once felt like home. She watched in silence, her heart heavier than it should have been for a woman who had already made up her mind. Sabrina was humming softly to herself, adjusting the placement of a vase, fluffing a pillow again and again, as though she could rearrange the entire room to distract herself from the real discomfort she felt. Every now and then, her eyes darted around, as if expecting to find Evelyn standing in the doorway, ready to offer unsolicited advice. But Evelyn didn't move. She simply watched, the room below still as foreign to her as the empty walls in her own heart. Tyler walked into the room, his voice loud enough for Evelyn to hear from the top of the stairs. "Let's keep Mom out of sight. Last time was awkward." His words sliced through the air, not spoken with malice, but with an indifference that still stung. He hadn't even looked up when he spoke. Evelyn, standing still as stone, let the words fall away. They weren't meant for her, not really, not in the way they used to be. With a quiet sigh, she turned and walked back toward the kitchen. Her movements were slow, deliberate, no longer the motions of someone trying to be seen, but of someone who had decided that being invisible was easier than fighting for acknowledgement. She filled the kettle with water, her hands steady as she set it on the stove. As the water began to heat, She moved to her desk, her eyes lingering on the small note she had written earlier. Leave the keys on the counter by next month. She hadn't yet handed it to them, hadn't figured out the right moment to make her move, but she knew she didn't have to wait much longer. A part of her wanted to drop the note now, as though it were a farewell, a final act of defiance, but she resisted, instead slipping it into the drawer, beneath papers that had long since gathered dust. A knock at the door broke the stillness of the kitchen. Aiden's head appeared around the corner, his eyes meeting hers before he even spoke. "You're sure about this?" His voice was gentle, like he already knew the answer, like he'd always known, but he couldn't bring himself to ask it again without hearing her say it herself. Evelyn turned away from the stove, meeting his gaze for the first time that evening. "No need to cancel your trip, Aiden," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I'll be elsewhere soon." He frowned, opening his mouth as if to protest, but Evelyn shook her head, cutting him off. She didn't need him to stay. She didn't need any more apologies. She had already made her peace with everything. "I'm fine," she added, giving him a quiet smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Aiden didn't say anything else. He simply nodded and walked away, but Evelyn could hear his footsteps as they retreated, heavy with unspoken words, questions that were easier left unsaid. She turned back to the kettle, watching the steam begin to curl upward, the familiar sound of boiling water filling the space between her thoughts. The next step was clear. There was nothing left to hold on to. She'd already made the decision to leave, but as she stood there, alone in the kitchen, the weight of what was about to happen settled on her like a blanket of inevitability. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Marcia's name flashed on the screen. Evelyn glanced at it briefly before picking up. "We're scheduled for notarization tomorrow," Marcia's voice came through the line, efficient and calm, as always. "The paperwork's ready to go. Just need your signature." Evelyn paused for a moment, the noise of the house fading in the background. Tyler and Sabrina's party was still going on downstairs, but Evelyn had long since stopped caring about it. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steady. "Let's get it done." She hung up and stood still for a moment longer, listening to the sound of laughter from below. It was distant, as if it belonged to someone else. Evelyn picked up her cup of tea, the warmth from the mug grounding her as she took a sip. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but there was no surprise in the sense of finality that washed over her. The last of her ties had been severed. Tomorrow it would be over. The house, the deed, her place in the world, all of it would be gone. And Evelyn couldn't help but wonder if anyone would ever truly understand what it cost her to get here. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, cutting through the quiet of the house. Evelyn had been sitting at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly turning the same cup of cold tea between her hands. The house felt like it was holding its breath, the last remnants of their so-called party still echoing faintly downstairs. The tension in the air was thick, but Evelyn had long since stopped trying to convince herself she belonged there. Tyler's footsteps approached the door, slow and heavy. Evelyn didn't move from her seat. There was nothing left to explain, no more energy to summon for another confrontation. "Mom," Tyler called, his voice lower than usual, as though he wasn't sure how to begin. "Can you come to the door?" She stood, the weight of the decision still pressing down on her chest. When she opened the door, Tyler was holding an envelope, its edges crinkled as if he'd gripped it too hard. His eyes were fixed on it, his brows furrowed with confusion. "What is this?" he asked, his voice uncertain. He handed her the letter without another word. Evelyn took it, glancing at the return address. She knew exactly what it was, and the calm that settled over her made her feel more at peace than she had in days. She didn't need to open it. The deed had been signed, the house no longer hers, the weight of years of sacrifice and disappointment suddenly lighter. "Just house business," she said, her voice even. "Don't worry, you won't need to shovel the driveway anymore." Tyler blinked, clearly taken aback. "What does that mean?" Before Evelyn could respond, Sabrina's voice rose from behind Tyler, sharp and anxious. "Is this legal?" She stepped into the doorway, her face pale, her hand twitching as if she might reach for the letter, but she didn't. Evelyn didn't flinch, her gaze steady. "As legal as excluding your mother from her own living room," she said softly, her words cutting through the space between them. There was no anger, just the quiet finality of truth. Sabrina's face twisted, her mouth opening and closing in confusion. She couldn't find the words to fight back, and Tyler stood in stunned silence, the letter still crumpled in his hand. Evelyn turned away from them then, no longer needing to explain. She didn't owe them an explanation. "I'm staying at Carla's until you're out," she said over her shoulder as she moved toward the kitchen. Tyler and Sabrina remained frozen in the doorway, but Evelyn didn't pause to look back. She had done what she needed to do. The finality of it settled over her like a weight lifting. She picked up the phone and dialed Marcia's number, her fingers steady despite the moment. "It's done," she said when Marcia answered. "The deed is officially transferred to Valor House. We're set for closing." "Good," Marcia's voice came through the line, a quiet satisfaction there. "I'll handle the rest. Everything is in the right hands now." Evelyn smiled faintly, the tiniest flicker of relief passing through her. She had given so much of herself over the years, trying to make it all work, but now it was over, and there was no regret. She hung up the phone and stood in the quiet of the kitchen, looking at the house one last time. The walls no longer felt like hers, not with the echoes of their indifference ringing in her ears. Tomorrow everything would be different, and she was ready. She turned toward the door, slipping the last remnants of her life there into her bag. No looking back. The letter arrived in the morning, an official-looking envelope, sealed and stamped, its finality hanging in the air. Tyler was the one who opened it. He didn't even flinch when he saw the words. The deed was officially transferred. The house was no longer theirs. "Mom," he muttered, his voice strained. He held the letter out to Sabrina, who had been standing in the doorway. She took it, her hands trembling as she read the notarized paper. The weight of it hit her immediately, the reality of it settling in like a rock in her stomach. "What does this mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Tyler's eyes were fixed on the letter in her hands. "It means we're out. We've got nothing." Aiden, standing in the hallway with a box in his hands, glanced at the letter but didn't speak. He simply kept packing, folding clothes with a methodical precision, as if it were just another day in the long series of days where he had been expected to do the heavy lifting, both figuratively and literally. Sabrina, unable to hold it in any longer, pulled out her phone and dialed Marcia's number. The phone rang once, then twice, before the voicemail clicked on. "Marcia, please," she said, panic creeping into her voice. "Call me back. This can't be legal. There has to be something we can do." But Marcia's voice was cool and efficient when it came through. "I represent the owner," she said, her tone final. "The transfer is complete. There's nothing more to discuss." Sabrina's finger hovered over the phone screen, but she didn't press redial. She lowered the phone to her side, her mouth a tight line of frustration. She didn't know how to react. This had been her home too, and now it was gone. Tyler didn't say anything at first. He just stared at the letter in his hand, the anger boiling beneath the surface. "It's done," he muttered. "We need to figure out where we're going." Sabrina didn't reply. She just looked out the window, her mind racing. Their neighbors had started to notice the tension. There were fewer invitations, fewer casual chats at the mailbox. The canceled party was a public acknowledgement of what had been building for weeks. It was impossible to ignore. Evelyn had left that morning, slipping out before anyone was awake. She hadn't said goodbye. She hadn't needed to. She was already gone in every way that mattered. She had driven to Carla's house, her escape as quiet and simple as possible. There was no fanfare, no dramatic exit, just the fading sound of a car driving away into the morning mist. Evelyn arrived at Carla's and unpacked her things without ceremony. The house felt empty, but it was hers. No judgment, no expectations. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Later, as she sorted through her things, she found the vintage linens, sheets, quilts, and blankets that had once adorned her bed. She had made them with care, with love, but now they would never be used again. She carefully folded them, packing them into bags, knowing that they would have a better home at Valor House, a place where they would mean something, where they would be useful. She sealed the bags with a quiet finality and sent them off. At least they would serve someone, make a difference where she no longer could. The house, her home, was gone. But Evelyn had moved on, and with each small step, she felt lighter. The door had closed, but it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Reggie Dawson arrived the next morning, his presence filling the doorway as he stepped inside. Tyler stood rigid, trying to act cordial, his posture stiff with an anger he couldn't shake. He wanted to be angry at Reggie, but he knew better. The truth was much harder to swallow than the man standing in front of him. Reggie was all business. He didn't acknowledge Tyler's greeting beyond a brief handshake, before walking through the house, his camera out, clicking photos of everything. He moved through the rooms with a quiet efficiency that only made the reality feel more final. Tyler followed behind him, his movements stiff, trying to appear calm, trying to act like this wasn't the end of something monumental. But the hollow ache in his chest wouldn't let him pretend. Sabrina stood by the window, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She couldn't bring herself to move or speak, though her eyes darted around, watching Reggie's every step. After a moment, she spoke, her voice cracking the silence. "Surely there's been a mistake," she said, but even she didn't believe the words. Her eyes searched Reggie's face, desperate for any sign that this could be undone. Reggie looked at her calmly, his voice unwavering. "None. The transfer is complete." His gaze swept over the room, pausing only briefly to snap a photo of the faded wallpaper, the damaged walls. He was methodical, noting the scratches in the wood floor, the chipped paint that had been ignored for far too long. Tyler clenched his jaw. "We kept the place in decent shape," he muttered, though his voice faltered. "Decent doesn't count," Reggie replied simply, his tone giving no room for argument. He was polite, but there was no softness in his eyes. It was a job, and that was all it would ever be. They continued their walkthrough in silence, Reggie documenting everything. Tyler felt like an intruder in his own home, and the shame began to settle heavily in his chest. He had thought he could fix things, thought that this house was a symbol of something, of success, of family. But now it was just a collection of broken promises, faded paint, and empty spaces. When they reached the kitchen, Tyler's eyes fell on a small piece of paper resting on the counter. It was Evelyn's note. She had left it behind, like a final message, a final truth. His hand reached for it without thinking. "This place deserved better. So do I." Tyler's breath caught. He folded the note quickly, stuffing it into his pocket without saying a word. Sabrina didn't need to see it, didn't need to know what she had left behind. The words stung in a way that nothing else had, and he couldn't bear to let her see it. Aiden entered the room quietly, carrying a box. He looked between his parents, his eyes falling on the note Tyler had just hidden, but Aiden didn't speak. He had been silent for days, as if waiting for the storm to pass, but now his gaze turned to Reggie, and after a long pause, he spoke, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "I can help," Aiden said quietly. "I'll pay rent if it helps. I'll do whatever I can." Reggie looked at him, his expression unreadable. After a beat, he shook his head, his voice soft but firm. "You don't owe for their choices." Aiden's face fell slightly, the words hanging in the air like a weight he didn't know how to carry. Tyler didn't know how to respond either. It felt like too much, too many choices, too many chances lost. Reggie finished his inspection, his camera clicking one last time as he noted the square footage. The sound echoed through the empty house, the click of the lens almost mournful. "The closing date is set," Reggie said as he turned toward the door. "This place will be a shelter now. It's done." He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. Silence descended, heavier than before. Tyler stood there for a moment, staring at the space where Reggie had been. Evelyn was gone, the house was gone, and nothing would ever be the same. The days blurred into one another after the house was gone. Evelyn, now settled at Carla's place, received regular updates through Marcia. She'd been silent since the transfer, letting the world unfold around her without a word, as if the silence itself was a kind of answer. Her phone buzzed in the quiet of Carla's living room, and Evelyn picked it up without hesitation. It was Marcia's number flashing on the screen. She answered, her voice calm and detached, her eyes focused on the window, where the sun was beginning to dip beneath the horizon. "The paperwork is all in order," Marcia's voice said, clear and professional. "Valor House is settled. Your name will be added to the donor wall next week." Evelyn nodded, even though Marcia couldn't see it. "Good," she replied softly. There was nothing more to say. The house had been signed over, and with that, her past was sealed in a box that no longer belonged to her. The updates from Marcia were regular now, and Evelyn listened to them, her heart growing heavier each time. But she didn't share the weight of her thoughts. She had nothing left to explain. The house was a memory, and her silence was the only response she had left to give. One evening, a long email appeared from Tyler, sent from an address she had once thought of as home. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She knew what it would say: apologies, excuses, promises to fix things. But Evelyn had already made her peace. She had no room for their regret, no space for their guilt. She deleted the message without reading a single word. Later that night, another message came through, this one from Aiden. "I'm sorry, I always saw you." Evelyn's fingers hovered over her phone for a moment. She stared at the text, her chest tightening. Aiden had always been different. He had always understood her, even when no one else did. She couldn't help but feel a flicker of warmth at his words, though it came with the sadness of knowing that it was too late for any of it to change. She responded simply, the words coming easily despite the ache in her chest. "I know you did." She put the phone down, letting the silence settle around her once more. A few days later, she joined a local quilting group. It was a small circle of women, none of whom had ever known her past, none who had any expectations of her. They gathered once a week to sew and share stories, and for the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt like she could just be. She didn't need to explain herself. No one asked. The quiet comfort of the group wrapped around her like a warm blanket, and for the first time since leaving the house, she allowed herself to breathe without feeling like something was missing. Her name was added to the donor wall at Valor House a week later, etched carefully among the names of others who had given what they could, in whatever way they could. Evelyn didn't go to see it. There was no need. Her contribution was simple but meaningful, and it was enough. As she sewed her first quilt with the group, she realized something important. She was finally at peace. The silence between her and the world had no longer felt like isolation. It felt like freedom. And somewhere, in the quiet of her heart, Evelyn knew she had done more than simply give away a house. She had found herself again. The morning was heavy with the sound of movement as Reggie arrived with the moving crew. Tyler stood at the door, his hands jammed deep into his pockets, his gaze fixed on the trucks pulling up outside. The reality of it, of the house being taken away, settled in like a weight he couldn't shift. He'd tried everything, arguments, requests. But now he stood there, powerless. Sabrina was by the window, arms crossed tightly, her lips pressed into a thin line. She hadn't said much since the official transfer. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than any words. Reggie didn't waste time. His camera clicked as he surveyed the rooms, moving through the house with methodical precision. Tyler followed him from room to room, his chest tight, his mind racing. Every step felt like a loss. The house that had been his, the home he thought would carry them through, was now just a place to pack away memories. Sabrina's voice finally broke the silence. "Surely there's been a mistake," she said. Her words soft, almost a plea. She stood at the threshold of the living room, her eyes darting between Tyler and Reggie, searching for some sign of hope, something to cling to. Reggie didn't flinch. "None," he replied simply, snapping another photo of a scuff on the wall. "The transfer is complete." Tyler clenched his fists, his anger simmering beneath the surface. "We kept the place in decent shape," he muttered, though it felt hollow, like a half-hearted defense. "Decent doesn't count," Reggie said, his voice impassive as he continued his work. The words landed like stones, sinking Tyler's stomach lower. They moved to the kitchen. As Tyler stood in the doorway, his eyes fell on the small piece of paper left on the counter. It was Evelyn's note. He moved instinctively to pick it up, as if doing so would erase the pain of what it said. This place deserved better. So do I. His breath caught. He folded the note quickly, tucking it into his pocket. Sabrina was still standing by the window, her back to them. Tyler didn't want her to see it. He couldn't bear to let her know how final it all was. Aiden walked in then, carrying a box. He paused when he saw the scene, his eyes flicking between his parents. He didn't speak, just set the box down and moved toward the truck. He was quiet, but there was a weight in his silence. The rift between father and son was deep, too deep for words now. "I can help," Aiden said quietly, his voice low as he turned back to Reggie. "I'll pay rent if it helps. I'll do whatever I can." Reggie glanced at him, his expression softening for a moment before he shook his head. "You don't owe for their choices," he said simply. Aiden's face fell, the hope he'd held on to flickering out like a candle in the wind. He didn't speak again, just turned back to the task, carrying boxes to the truck. Marcia arrived shortly after, her presence as efficient as always. She handed Tyler the final documents, already signed and sealed, ready for him to sign his life away. He didn't look at her, just signed where he was told to, the pen moving automatically. It was all done. The house, his past, gone. Reggie continued his work, taking one last look around before he nodded toward the door. "The closing date is set. This place will be a shelter now. It's done." Tyler stood there, the finality of the words sinking in, the room feeling smaller, emptier. Sabrina didn't say anything, just stood at the window, her eyes distant. As the trucks rolled away, the house stood silent behind them. Tyler's eyes followed the trucks as they disappeared down the street. Evelyn had walked past the house earlier, heading in the opposite direction, not a glance back. Tyler couldn't bring himself to stop her, to ask for forgiveness or understanding. The house, the home that had once been filled with their lives, was now just a memory, and there was no going back. Sabrina sat on the couch, her phone in hand, staring at the screen. She had crafted the post carefully, each word chosen to project strength and loss, a mixture of grief and gratitude. It was a performance, as it always was with her, calculated, precise, an image for the world to see. She tapped the post button with a practiced flick of her thumb. The post went live, and for a moment, Sabrina felt the familiar rush of satisfaction. She was finally making it public. The house was gone, but she would tell the story on her terms. It wasn't a loss. It was a step forward, she told herself, a chance for reinvention. But as the minutes passed, the notifications were sparse. One like, then a comment. Her chest tightened as she read it. Wasn't her name on the deed? The words hit her like a slap, a reminder of the question she couldn't answer. Sabrina stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the reply box. The silence of the post hung heavy, louder than any comment could be. She wanted to respond, to explain, but she couldn't find the words. Instead, she put the phone down, not bothering to check it again. Evelyn, meanwhile, had completely forgotten about the post. She was too busy, too immersed in a new life she hadn't anticipated, but had welcomed with open arms. After moving into her modest new space at Carla's, she had joined a local group of veterans' wives who met every week. It wasn't long before Evelyn was baking cookies for their fundraiser, her hands working quickly, skillfully, without thought. The hum of the kitchen, the chatter of the other women, was her new rhythm, one she had longed for without knowing it. As she shaped the dough into small rounds, her hands steady, Evelyn realized that she was part of something again, not just an afterthought. She wasn't being judged, wasn't being silenced. The women around her were focused on the present, on building something meaningful. And in that, Evelyn had found her peace. One evening, Reggie called her, inviting her to a fundraising dinner. The organization was doing well, but they needed more support, more visibility. He wanted her to speak, just a few words, nothing grand. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, then agreed. It felt right, a small contribution to a cause she could believe in. At the dinner, Evelyn stood before a small crowd, her voice steady as she spoke about the importance of giving back, of ensuring veterans had a safe place to start over. Her words weren't polished, but they were honest. She looked out at the faces in front of her, the warmth of the room settling in her chest. This was real. This was where she belonged. As the evening wore on, Evelyn moved through the crowd, shaking hands, listening to stories. Offering her own, she realized that this was more than just a new chapter. It was the beginning of a whole new life, one where she was valued for what she had to give, not for what others took. Back at the house, the one that had been hers, but now was a shelter for displaced female veterans, things were changing too. The space had taken on new life, filled with laughter and the sound of children running through the halls. The rooms that had once been so quiet now vibrated with energy, hope, and a renewed sense of purpose. Aiden came to visit one afternoon, his footsteps quiet as he moved through the now familiar space. He helped paint the walls in the room at the end of the hall, a soft shade of blue that made the room feel brighter. He read to the children before bedtime, the young faces attentive and curious. He didn't need to say much. Just being there, helping, was enough. Evelyn noticed him one evening as she passed through the hallway. She smiled softly as she handed him the spare key. "You know where it goes," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "No one else." Aiden nodded, his heart heavy, but there was a quiet understanding between them. He could come and go as he pleased. This place was his too, though neither of them needed to say it aloud. He slipped the key into his pocket, grateful for the connection they still shared. As Evelyn stepped back into the kitchen, her mind at ease, she realized that the house was no longer her home. But she had created something better, a place where she could belong, a place where others could start over. And in that, she had found the true meaning of home. The envelope was thick, sealed with a quiet finality that had Aiden's heart skipping a beat. It arrived on a Wednesday morning, slipping through the door unnoticed by the others in the house. He picked it up slowly, turning it over in his hands. He had no idea what to expect, but the weight of it felt significant, like a decision, a conclusion that had been quietly building. Sitting down at the kitchen table, he sliced it open with a dull knife, his hands still a little shaky. Inside, the letter was short, the handwriting unmistakable, Evelyn's neat script, each letter firm, controlled, final. "Aiden, I am naming you the sole trustee of my remaining estate. I trust you will know what to do with it. Please remember that this decision is not just about money, but about continuing what we've started. Valor House has my heart, and I know you'll ensure it grows in the way it should. With love." Evelyn Aiden sat there for a long moment, the weight of her words settling in. She had given him everything, the responsibility, the chance to carry on what she'd started, the trust that had once been held in such fragile hands. He could almost hear her voice as he read the letter, calm, steady, giving. Evelyn had always known how to make him feel like he mattered, even when it seemed like no one else did. He folded the letter carefully, his mind racing. It was a lot to absorb, a lot to shoulder. But as he looked down at the words again, something solidified in his chest. This wasn't just a gift. It was a challenge. Evelyn was gone, but this was her way of telling him to continue, to keep pushing forward. Aiden moved through the days with quiet determination. He moved his mother's accounts into a protected trust, just as Evelyn had requested. She had lived modestly, but her savings, though modest, were enough to provide for a future that wasn't burdened by the past. He saw the way she had planned it, the way she had made sure that nothing would slip through the cracks after she was gone. Evelyn's foresight had been impressive, even if it had been unspoken. As the weeks passed, Tyler and Sabrina never reached out again, not a single word, not a text, not an email. They had no right to ask for anything anymore. Evelyn had taken care of the final matter, the house, her possessions, the quiet inheritance of it all. They were ghosts in her life now, mere figures in the background of a story she had long since finished writing. But Aiden didn't feel anger toward them. He wasn't angry. He had found his purpose, found his place in the world where he was needed, where he could make a difference. And with that, he let the silence with his parents sit where it belonged. He didn't need their validation, their approval. Evelyn had given him something far greater than they ever could. He spent his days managing the donations to Valor House under Evelyn's name, her legacy now tied to him in a way he never imagined. The shelter, once quiet and uncertain, was thriving. The money flowed in, the programs expanded. Women were given a place to heal, to start over. The house that had been taken from his family had found its true purpose. One evening, a letter arrived for Evelyn, though it wasn't for her anymore. Aiden opened it, his heart quickening when he saw it was from the city. It was an award, a recognition for housing reform, honoring Evelyn's contributions to the veterans community. He smiled softly, remembering the dinners they had shared, the quiet talks about how small actions could change the world. The ceremony was brief, a small gathering of people who had never known Evelyn but appreciated her work. Aiden stood in front of the room, accepting the plaque on her behalf. He wasn't sure if he was more surprised by the recognition or by the weight of what he was holding. He had always known Evelyn had made a difference, but now it was official. She had changed lives, and he would ensure that legacy lived on. As Aiden left the ceremony that evening, Marcia caught him by the door. She smiled, her expression knowing. "Most people rewrite the will," she said, her tone light but filled with meaning. "You rewrote the ending." Aiden glanced down at the plaque in his hand, the weight of it settling more comfortably than he ever thought it would. He wasn't just Evelyn's son. He was the one she had chosen to carry her torch, to make her vision real. And in that moment, he knew that whatever came next, he was ready. He wasn't just carrying the weight of a legacy. He was building something far greater than himself. And this time, there would be no stopping it. Evelyn had everything in place long before she entered hospice. The paperwork was done. The trust was established. It was all a quiet culmination of years of careful planning. Now, there was only waiting. Aiden sat beside her, his hand resting lightly on hers. The room was still, save for the soft beeping of the monitor and the distant murmur of nurses down the hall. But in here, in this moment, it was just the two of them. She squeezed his hand weakly. "I'm ready," she said, her voice raw but calm. A tired smile tugged at her lips. Aiden nodded. He had seen this coming, yet there was something final in her words. She wasn't just talking about her illness, but about everything. The decisions were made. Her life, her legacy, all of it was set in motion. She gave him everything he needed. The house, the estate, the trust, everything tied to Valor House. Aiden had always been her quiet shadow, the one she trusted, the one who understood the weight of responsibility even when he hadn't asked for it. And now, it was his. Over the past weeks, she had methodically sorted through her belongings. Not one thing was left for Tyler or Sabrina. They were ghosts in her life now, people whose time had passed in her world. She kept only what mattered to her, what would matter to Aiden. Aiden sat silently as she handed him a small flash drive, her fingers shaking. "Use this for whatever matters," she whispered, the words softer than usual. "Never let them make you feel like clutter." Aiden didn't ask what she meant. He simply took the drive, slipping it into his pocket. It would reveal itself when the time was right. For now, he just sat with her, holding her hand, listening to the faint sounds of the world moving outside the room. Every day, Aiden visited her. Sometimes they talked, sometimes just sat in silence, the quiet between them comfortable. But each moment he spent with her was a moment of clarity, of knowing that she had lived her life with purpose, and that now he was to carry that purpose forward. Then one morning it happened. Evelyn passed away quietly in the early hours of the day. Aiden was there, just as she had wanted. The stillness in the room was not filled with grief, but with peace. She had done it on her terms. 3 weeks later, Aiden met with Marcia to finalize the remaining parts of the trust. She sat across from him, calm as always, but there was a subtle shift in her demeanor when she handed him the final paperwork. "It's done," Marcia said, her voice low but kind. "Everything's set in motion." Aiden signed the papers without hesitation. There was no turning back now. This wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about Evelyn's vision, her legacy. And it was his responsibility to make sure it continued. As Aiden left Marcia's office, he felt the weight of everything Evelyn had left him. It wasn't just the legal papers, the trust, or the wealth. It was the foundation of something larger, something bigger than any of them. And now it was his turn to build it. He reached into his pocket, feeling the flash drive still nestled there. There was no more room for doubt. This was his path now, and he was ready to take the first step. Tyler and Sabrina sat in a small office, the air thick with tension. The clerk flipped through their application without looking up. She paused when she saw the eviction records, then glanced up at them, her expression neutral. "I'm sorry, but we can't approve this application," she said, her voice as cold as the paper in front of her. "We have a strict policy about eviction records." Sabrina's fingers tightened around her purse, but she kept her voice level. "Isn't there anything we can do?" We're trying to get back on our feet. The clerk didn't budge. It's company policy. Without a clean record, we can't rent to you. Tyler stared at the floor, his jaw clenched. Every word felt like another stone added to the weight he carried. The house, his last real asset, was gone. And now they were being denied a place to stay. The irony wasn't lost on him. They had once lived in that house like it was their kingdom, and now they couldn't even secure a roof over their heads. They left the leasing office without another word, the sound of the door closing behind them feeling more like a final nail in the coffin than anything else. Sabrina was silent. Her arms crossed tightly as they walked to the car. Tyler, struggling to keep his emotions in check, was the first to break the silence. "Can you believe this?" he muttered under his breath. "After everything, we can't even get a place to live." Sabrina didn't respond, but Tyler could feel her anger simmering beneath the surface. They were both too proud to beg, too bitter to accept their situation without a fight. Their next stop was the house, their house, now owned by Valor House. Reggie was standing outside, watching as the moving trucks pulled away from the driveway. When Tyler and Sabrina approached, he gave them a firm, polite nod. "Reggie," Tyler said, his voice tight. "We were hoping we could rent it back, just for a little while. We need a place." Reggie shook his head. "It's not an option. The house belongs to Valor House now. It's being used for something greater." Sabrina's voice caught in her throat, the words heavy with disbelief. "We've been here for years. You can't just—" "I'm sorry," Reggie interrupted. "I wish I could help, but it's already decided." Tyler clenched his fists at his sides. "You can't just turn us away. We don't have anywhere else to go." Reggie didn't flinch. "You lost that right when you ignored what your mother wanted. Now, we're giving it to those who need it. It's not for you anymore." Sabrina stood there, her face pale, her eyes burning with frustration. Tyler could see the resignation settle into her expression, and something inside him snapped. The loss was too much, the injustice too great. They left the house, the finality of it weighing heavily on them. Tyler couldn't bring himself to look back at the porch, where he once had so many plans and dreams. That house, once a symbol of their success, was now a place for strangers, for women who needed it more than they ever had. At Valor House, the space was being transformed. Aiden, now working alongside Marcia, had become a quiet force behind the growing success of the shelter. The donations kept coming in, and the once dormant house was alive with purpose. The front porch had been rebuilt, the rocking chair where Evelyn had once sat now a symbol of what she had left behind. Her name was etched on the community plaque, a permanent reminder of her work, her vision. Aiden visited the house often, his heart steady with the knowledge that it was now a place of refuge. He watched as women moved in, finding solace in the home that had once been his mother's. It was no longer about his family's past. It was about the future he and Evelyn had built together. The garden sign stood at the edge of the yard, the words etched in stone. "I took up space, and I made it count." Aiden smiled softly, the weight of his mother's legacy settling over him like a comforting blanket. He had done it. He had made it count. Evelyn's memoir, Worn Fabric and Steel, was published by a small press. It was a quiet book, unassuming but powerful in its honesty. The pages captured her life, her time in the Navy, the years spent building a family, and the decisions that led her to gift a house to Valor House, to make a lasting difference. The book didn't make the bestseller list, but it didn't need to. It reached those who needed it most, the veterans, the ones who'd always felt like they were left behind. The house, the one Tyler and Sabrina had once claimed as their own, had become something far more significant. Now a fully functioning shelter, it not only provided safe refuge for women, but also served as a mentoring space. Women who arrived lost and broken began to rebuild themselves within those walls, finding support, strength, and hope. The rooms once filled with tension and isolation were now filled with life, laughter, and shared stories. It had taken on a new purpose, and it thrived because of Evelyn's vision. Aiden had seamlessly stepped into his role, managing the trust with an ironclad focus. His mother's vision had become his own, and he found fulfillment in ensuring Valor House's future. He also began advocating for elder rights, using his newfound platform to speak for those who could no longer speak for themselves. The quiet work Evelyn had started had now become a movement, and Aiden was leading it. Meanwhile, Tyler and Sabrina had become shadows of their former selves. Tyler, unable to reconcile his failure, applied for jobs under a different address, hoping to erase the shame that clung to him. It was a constant fight to get back to a semblance of what he thought was normal, but he knew deep down that it wasn't enough. Nothing could ever undo what had happened. Sabrina, in her own way, tried to disappear. She deleted her old social media accounts, as if erasing her presence online would somehow erase the past. But in the digital age, erasing yourself wasn't that simple. She still lurked on the periphery of social circles, a ghost who couldn't quite fade. No one noticed when she deleted her accounts. The connections she had once built so carefully fell apart with the click of a button. Aiden, meanwhile, continued to visit the house. It had become his second home, the place where his mother's spirit seemed to linger, where her words and visions still shaped the world around him. One afternoon, he stood by the garden, watching the sunlight filter through the trees. He walked over to the rocking chair, the one that had once belonged to Evelyn. It was now a permanent fixture on the porch, a tribute to the woman who had created something so much more than just a house. Aiden placed a rose on the chair, the simple gesture carrying all the weight of what he had inherited. He stood there for a long moment, his mind full of memories of his mother, her strength, her quiet wisdom, the way she had always made space for others, even when she was pushed aside. And then, as if by some quiet cosmic alignment, Aiden understood. He understood that the house had never been theirs to keep. It was never just a structure. It had been Evelyn's way of taking up space in a world that often overlooked her. And when she was gone, it was Aiden's turn to carry that weight. As he stepped away from the chair and turned to leave, the words from his mother's final note echoed in his mind. I took up space, and I made it count. Evelyn had made her space count. Now it was his turn to do the same. And so, with the weight of that rose still resting on his heart, Aiden walked away from the house, the home that was never meant to stay in their hands. It had always been hers to give, and now it was his to shape, just as she had done. My son asked me to leave the house during their dinner party because I smelled like old fabric, so I donated the deed to a veterans charity and let them beg for rent like strangers. Evelyn's final words, etched into Aiden's soul, would guide him forward.